Greetings, everybody. This is Leviathan here, and today we've got Diablo 4 news. So exciting to say that it's still real, it's still a thing, it's still coming. A link to this particular blog will be in the video description, so feel free to scroll down and click that so you can read along with us. I'm not going to read word for word everything that we've got here, but if you may recall from a couple of previous videos I've done covering D4, they noted that at the end of last year, for 2020, they would try to give us at least one update per quarter of the year. So this is our quarter one update coming in the tail end of February. And we've got some pretty interesting things here. It starts out with an introduction of this series coming from Luis Barriga. Sorry if I mispronounced the name. That's the game director. And we have an introduction of two, I guess, which is a little out of the norm. It seems like he was saying maybe there will just be one in the future per quarterly update, but we have two highlights here. One on UI design, controller support, and co-op from Angela Del Priore, lead UI designer, and then monster family and design highlight, Cannibal Tribes, with Candace Thomas, there's a name I can say, senior encounter designer. I've read through both of these in my spare time, and there are some pretty cool points here. A couple I'll highlight as takeaways. The intro doesn't have anything too much in there, just besides the fact that Luis is, kind of introducing himself. This is the Diablo 4 website, a blog section. He's excited about this series. Again, it's going to be quarterly throughout the year. He's got two updates that we mentioned above. And then one thing to mention here is that he mentions, we're looking forward to your thoughts and comments on these updates, and let us know the sorts of things that you'd like to hear next. Since not every topic is going to appeal to every person, feel free to bug them on Twitter or Reddit, wherever you find this post or wherever you usually communicate with Blizzard. Let them know what you want to hear about, because that can affect the future of what updates we get. I personally sent a tweet at the Diablo account on Twitter and was just like, hey, I really want to know about items. I'd particularly like to know about other features that would be in line or similar to key dungeons. Like, I want to know about the things that we'll be doing as players on a day-to-day basis that will keep the game interesting and fresh. So right up top, I'm looking forward to the next one, and I want to see some stuff on that. So fingers crossed that maybe they'll listen. Talking first about this UI design, controller support, and co-op update, Angela has some really great points here. She mentions that, there was some feedback at BlizzCon, which is the first time that we all got to see the game and play it, that they took to heart, and it ended up making an impact on what they've gone forward with as far as the UI updates. One of the main goals that they have is trying to make sure that the interface has clarity in how they're communicating with players, but also having, this like vision of how the game is supposed to look, whether it's like a painterly style or that grim dark fantasy that they're really trying to harken back to with D4 in general. So it's form versus function, right, is the general umbrella you can put over that. And I would say, personally for myself, I'm a big fan of function. I usually don't care how things look. It's nice if it looks pretty, but I think the more important part is that it works well for what it's supposed to do. And you see examples of that coming up here. They mentioned in the inventory, for instance, some of the things they wanted to change was just like readability or clarity in terms of understanding what items you've got. So they dimmed some of these backgrounds, like the yellow and the green and the red here. Or I guess maybe this is a bit of a brownish, a tannish. And they also made it so that there's a bit more easy readability at a glance with the borders of the items, aligning with the colors as well. So it could be the smallest things that you might not even notice if you're not looking for it, but in terms of just the experience of a player looking at the game and being able to easily, quickly understand what's happening, usually it's working really well if you don't notice it at all. If things feel really glaringly odd, or you're like, why does that look like that? Then that's probably a case where they need to make an improvement. So think about that. They mentioned, like I was saying, tone down some brightness, saturation. Here is something that I found particularly interesting, is a feedback on the inventory. They did mention that they're going to stick with each item taking up 2 spaces. That's even for jewelry. You can see here, right? Like an amulet or a ring, if you're coming from Diablo 3 world, they usually only take up 1 spot. But everything is going to take up, I guess, quote unquote, 2 spaces in your inventory. But you can see that they're all kind of broken out to these one spaces anyways. You could maybe divide them and think of them as two. But they're avoiding that idea of inventory Tetris. You've known it from other games like Diablo 2 or even Path of Exile, where you're like, I want to pick up this staff, but it's 6 slots and I only have 4, so what do I move around to open up 6 potentially? I'm fine with that. That's kind of like a function thing over form, right? Because normally you might want a bigger item to take up more space, but I don't care. I don't want to juggle items in my inventory. I'd rather spend time just pick up and then keep playing the game. So that was one thing that they mentioned there. This is probably the most interesting part of the blog in particular, is the rebinding of the left click and keybinds in general. I'm surprised that she found this surprising, because I think this has been one of the most asked for or looked for things whenever anyone is picking up a new ARPG these days. And maybe it's just because Path of Exile set the standard for it, but left click really should just be for movement. I think a majority of players want a dedicated movement button that is very easy and not going to change based on what you're clicking on or anything like that. We just want bound movement. But they went a step beyond here, and they mentioned that a surprising number of players asked for the option to rebind primary skill to anything but the left mouse so that they could separate moving from attacking. They want to add more flexibility to the binding options, and that was on the radar, and the demo feedback helped confirm it. They said in addition to giving players the freedom to assign any skill to any slot from the get-go, all skill slots can now also have their keys rebound. So that means you can put anything anywhere and assign it to any button. That's awesome. So that means you can really make for some custom setups, and that seems to be kind of a theme that's driven throughout her UI update, is that they're looking to really give players a lot of options here. Another thing that they get into is the left corner action bar, so you know where you're looking for your health and your skill cooldowns, etc. It was at the left at the demo, and they thought that that would be fine, but they got some feedback that people liked it in the center. So they actually did move it back to the center. However, options. You can actually choose whether you'd like it to be in the left or in the center. And she actually went into an interesting thing about it really depends on where you sit. If you're far back from your screen, you might have a better field of view, so you can take in more information, and where your UI is, it can actually not matter that much because you see everything, right? However, if you're sitting closer, or maybe you're on a TV versus a computer screen, etc., then you might have more eye tracking, which is kind of what's on display here. And that would be something where maybe you want your UI in the left, or, you know, so it's just these options of how you might play and how your playing scenarios could change, especially depending on who you are, making it pretty cool that they're just keeping these things in consideration. I think a big, I don't want to say buzzword because it feels like it trivializes it a little bit, but accessibility is the word I'm looking for. Seems like it's really important in gaming these days, and just making sure there are enough options for a multitude of players to enjoy the game without any hassle. And then just quickly touching on supporting controllers on the PC. They are going to do that, which I know some players are really elated about because they've wanted controller support for as many PC games as possible, especially with a lot of games driven through Steam now, which can enable controller support for some things. They mentioned that it's creating an interesting scenario for them because they're designing both console and PC at the same time, and not trying to constrict one for the other. They're instead just making conscious choices based on whichever setup would work best. So with the controller setups in mind, mouse and keyboard are going to have different flows through menus and such, like you can see here in this example, mouse on the left, as a controller would. So they set up the skills and things in grids, where a controller can definitely get through a grid nice and easily because going up, down, left, right, and then, you know, A or X or whatever to select through. But in a mouse, you know, you're going to be able to click on stuff, drag stuff. You have a lot more of that dexterity control with your hand. So you want both setups to be able to perform the way that makes the most sense for the person utilizing that setup, if you think about it that way. And they're trying to enable that. So again, it's just this another way of driving home that there will be options for players, depending on which way you like to play, and even if you just want to change it up on a day-to-day basis. And as far as couch co-op goes, one of the things they had heard some feedback on was how people, when they were playing in couch co-op, did not like when someone opened a menu, it just froze up action for everybody that was playing. So they looked at some of the most, you know, primary examples of how people were playing couch co-op. Noticed it was a lot of 2 people on the same couch playing together. So they really wanted to make sure that that two-player co-op experience was pristine, or at least improved. And so now they've changed the UI with that in mind so that you can have multiple sides open at the same time. So if player one wants to mess around with their skills or with their inventory, player two can also do something similar, so that even though there's downtime, both of them are making improvements at the same time, versus one player just watching the other do something. And that, to me, is a great change. I don't even play that much console, but I just like that they're thinking like these levels of convenience, I suppose. You know, just getting out front of issues and taking in the feedback from stuff that's already occurred, which was one of my biggest fears, is that we would learn all these lessons from D3 and previous games and other games out in the genre right now, but not apply them moving forward. So just hearing that, you know, there's this freshness of approach to all these new ideas or old ideas coming forward, and just making sure to improve on what they can, it makes me really hopeful that that'll just be part of the process that continues to flow forward as we get more of these updates. So that's that blog. There's a lot more in there. Feel free to, again, read through that on your own. It's in the video description for the link to this blog post. And then just moving into Monster Family and design highlights, there is a lot here, but it's not necessarily up my alley. There's some lore here. They're discussing in particular this Cannibals family. You can definitely read that. I'm not going to dive too heavily into it, but I wanted to introduce the concept of monster families and how they discuss it, because I think it's particularly interesting. This video just shows you kind of like, with some music, shows panning of the monsters. It's pretty interesting. You can click on that if you want. So a monster family is really cool to me because they describe it essentially as these like synergistic bands of units that all, you know, tie together thematically. So think of the Fallen with the shaman, and they raise up, you know, the little guys to come back and keep coming back until you kill their revivers. That's just like a basic level of it. But here there's an example where they are talking about, I believe it's like the river monsters, the drowned family, and they have these 5 archetypes that they touch on. I'm just going to see if I can find it here without slowing down the video too much. But the idea is that these, here it is, they have 5 members in various archetypes: Bruiser, Range Combat, Melee Combat, Swarmer, and Dungeon Boss. And so these archetypes represent, you know, the monsters that you will find in the game, and they fulfill different roles. Like a Bruiser, you can even think about concepts from MOBAs and stuff, right? That's just going to be somebody that, you know, soaks up damage, pretty tanky, has big attacks, will stun you if you get hit, but pretty easy to dodge potentially because they're slower moving or slower swinging. And then some other supporting archetypes around that, so that while you're looking out for that big incoming Bruiser damage, you have just, you know, maybe the Swarmers are coming in and trying to get you from all sides, or the range combat's just picking at you from a distance. I don't know why, like, this is a obvious concept in terms of you've seen it a million times in RPGs, but the way that they're describing it here just sounds really interesting, because to me it's noting that they are conscious of positional moment-to-moment scenarios in combat. And I don't know if Diablo 4 is going to be a slower RPG than some of the previous ones. So D3, PoE, I consider those to be fast RPGs, because think about like speed farming in both games, etc. Like you were just trying to mow through maps and GRs and such as quickly as possible. And things don't really slow down until big boss fights, and you have to watch out for a lot of mechanics and stuff in, you know, potentially both games. Here it seems like maybe combat pacing will be slower. You know, it's tough to get a sense of it from the demo because you're not a fully kitted out character just yet. And who knows exactly how powerful or not powerful you're supposed to be in a demo. But just the idea of maybe it'll be a bit toned down, and you have to watch your feet. You have to, you know, position around the enemies that are actually setting a blockade, so that the guys from range that are part of their monster family are just able to, you know, without taking any damage, throw tons of attacks at you from far. And you have to think strategically on the battlefield. Am I going to be able to get to them before I take too much damage and I die? Do I take out the guys in front of me first? Like, I just continuing to question the players and make them respond to what's happening in a smart way, and rewarding that, like being able to get, you know, better advantage on the battlefield by being a smarter player, engaging your brain. Huge, like one of my favorite things in games in general, because combat and battle matters so much to me personally. Just this idea seems amazing, and they're gonna have lots of these types of families. They introduced the cannibal one, which is more about them closing distance quickly on you. So, you know, there are gonna be these different families that also make you, once you kind of get one or you see one, like one person, one archetype from the family, you can be like, oh yeah, I need to be on guard for, you know, the rest of this possible dude's crew because they will all jump in as well. Or, oh yeah, there's going to be one guy who always does this thing over there. Something like that, right? You can just start to get these cues of how battle is going to be. You figure out the dance, if you will. You learn how to waltz. So I know that was a lot of words there. And again, most of this here is just sort of talk about the lore and the fantasy of this Cannibals family and stuff. But the biggest takeaway from this for me was the archetype scenario and how they're going to hopefully apply it towards all the monsters that they create. And I don't know, after playing some Wolcen, I'm not very far into that either. I'm just drawing off of a lot of other ARPG comparisons because I think that'll probably be a lot of how D4 is gauged, is based on what's happened in the past and what's happening in the modern market for the ARPG. Wolcen slowed down a bit, but it has a lot of telegraphed attacks. Like you can see where the attacks are going to be, and there is reward for quickly dodging out of the way of things. There's even a quick dodge roll button that you can bind to whatever and move out of the way of attacks. And I don't know, I like that it's starting to really grow on me, this idea of a little bit of slowed down battling, but really rewarding in terms of pristine movement, mechanical execution, etc. So I guess we'll see what happens as the development continues, as we get more updates with these blogs and such. Let me know what you guys think. My view of the response to this seemed mostly positive, and then there were some people who were a little disappointed just because it wasn't that much here. And it's a little tough because we're going to have to wait now another 3 months for the next update. But I think that's just the nature of where we are with D4. It's not that far along yet, so they don't have that much to show us. Hopefully some of these updates could be super juicy in the future. We don't know what we're going to get. But yeah, hop into the comments. Let me know what you think. If there's anything here that intrigued you, what you want to see next from the updates, what your feelings are on Diablo 4 in general, what you're liking in the ARPG atmosphere right now. Let's just talk it up a little bit because there's a lot going on, and it's an exciting time to be an ARPG player. So until next time, everybody, thanks for watching this video. I'm going to catch you in the next one. Adios for now. Don't forget to subscribe.